was someone in Miami in the 1950s to try to implement a program where blacks are brought into the arts in a public way, not to mention with white people as well, was unheard of and very risky.
Who was to say, because we were African Americans, that we could be exempt from the fine arts?
The Fine Arts Conservatory broke all the barriers.
They wanted to see you succeed, and I thought that was one of the best things that happened to me since I was born.
The conservatory was this island of integration.
The Fine Arts Conservatory became my second home.
White and black teachers working together with white and black kids in the early 1950s is unprecedented.
We didn't know that we were different, but we definitely knew that we were special because that's what we were taught.
It's Thursday, and I'm looking up at the Eiffel Tower.
My inspiration for the Fine Arts Conservatory really originated in Paris. I went to Paris in the summer of 1949 to study at the Fontainebleau. I studied with Nadia Boulanger, who taught Aaron Copland, George Gershwin, and even me. I noticed that there was no segregation there. And after Arnold, my husband, and I returned from Paris, we had a different view of sociability. And when we came back and saw there was so much regulation of the races being separated, I knew that I couldn't teach the way I had taught before in Miami, that I had to open it up to anyone who was gifted, no matter what economy they were in or what their race was.
My mother was a rabid integrationist. My mother was on a mission, and her mission was to bring music and art and dance to South Florida, but to bring it to everyone, not just white people.
The Fine Arts Conservatory was started by Ruth Greenfield in 1951 was a blessing to this town. In fact, a blessing to the country, because here was a white woman who would come into a black neighborhood and teach black children how to sing and dance and emote and things like that. And during those days, you know, people did not accept that. Segregation was rough.
Black people could not vote without fear of retribution, losing their jobs if they voted, or even worse. You could not attend public places if you were a black person, public beaches, parks, swimming pools were not open to blacks. You could not shop in some stores downtown without being subject to segregation. A black woman could not try on clothes at Bernard's and other department stores here. Blacks could not hold certain jobs. They were not admitted to labor unions. The school system was very, very segregated.
Miami was a deep South city, as deep as you can get in terms of racial segregation. A segregation wall was built in the late 1930s that separated the black half of Northwest 12th Avenue, north of 62nd Street, from the white half. That was the Liberty Square, Liberty City half, to wall off the black people from the white people. A wall was erected as late as 1948 in Coconut Grove that bifurcates a block that separates the white half of the block from the black half of the block.
You wonder, you know, what you did. I mean, you must have done something wrong. And I asked my mother, well, what did we do? Why are we treated like this? And she can give me an answer. She said, you're treated like this because these are the laws, and you were treated like this because you were born a different color.
You were a child prodigy,
Well,
And,
I never thought of myself
I know, but when I met you, you were already playing your own music.
Yeah.
What did you play? What was that piece? That it was a sonata?
It's concerto.
Just play the melody for me.
You remember?
Yeah.
Let me see. It was, let me see. I was 13 when I composed that.
Yeah.
Ruth saw me as the first student of the Fine Arts Conservatory, but I didn't understand that then.
In 1951, I started at my home and put an ad in the paper. And the first person who came was a young man with his mother, James Ford. When he arrived, he was 13. He had been taught at Juilliard in New York, came back to Miami, and he was not admitted to any of the so-called advanced schools.
You know, the best conservatories were segregated, and they refused to accept Negroes, as they called them, at the time.
James Ford has always been connected to the family here, and I've watched him over the years. He's must have been an astonishing young man as a teenager, as a young teenager. I mean, he was composing, and his music was rather mature.
There was a music program at the Miami Library which was dedicated to Miami composers. And it was a natural for Jim to play. So I called and spoke to the woman who was in charge, and I said, I've got a very talented young man, and he's ready to play on your program.
And then when they found that I was Negro, they didn't use the word Afro-American then. They said I wasn't qualified to play.
So I called Jack Bell, who was called the town crier at the Herald, and I told him the story. And he said, yeah, he'll put something in. And it happened to be National Music Week. So he said in the article, a young man, highly gifted, had a father who was a doctor, a mother who's a principal, and he can't play in public with others. Isn't that really a sad indication of our city? The next day the woman called and said he can play.
In 1953, for a black student to be able to perform music publicly in a public venue was certainly unprecedented.
I wasn't trying to set a precedent. But looking back at it, I'm sure I did.
As the Fine Arts Conservatory grew, we took it from our houses and put it into buildings. Some were in Brownsville, Liberty City, South Miami at the Unitarian Church, Cutler Ridge, on the beach.
The Fine Arts Conservatory was a lot of different locations. So I do remember, for example, in Overtown when they had the funeral home for a very short period of time. I remember the smells, of course, because there was formaldehyde, and I did ask my mother about that. I said, well, what is this smell that we have here? And she said, oh, don't worry, dear, it's just formaldehyde. Let's go ahead and practice now. We have to practice. We have a little performance coming up.
I think it was probably the first dead body I ever saw at the age of 8 or 9 was in the basement of a funeral parlor.
The Fine Arts Conservatory was kind of like a vagabond institution in that it didn't really have a permanent home base. They were at Kelsey Forest Funeral Parlor. They were in the offices of some of the black leaders in Overtown. They went anywhere where they could get a space. And that really shows you how resourceful the teachers, the volunteers who were part of that were. They were undaunted.
The Fine Arts Conservatory instituted a curriculum. With that curriculum, students were enrolled in 3 to 5 courses, and they studied with one instructor for 6 weeks or so, and then went into another program.
Everything eventually was taught there. Drama, art, ballet. At first it was all music.
The kids used to come on Saturday. They would be so happy to see a white face that would smile back at them. You didn't see many of that.
For some of us, it was the only experience that we had with white people. And we got a chance to see that we are more alike than we are different. I became a part of the Fine Arts Conservatory, I guess about 7th grade. It took a while to determine what instrument I could play that I should be introduced to. And finally, they settled on the cello. My mother would take me every Saturday there, and the teacher struggled with me trying to play the cello. And then one day he made a mistake. Maybe it wasn't such a mistake, but he said to me, once you learn to play the cello, you will know it because you'll have corns on your fingertips. Well, that was my last Saturday, because I decided that with these long, pretty fingers, I was not going to have corns on my fingertips. Perhaps what I learned most and gained most from the Fine Arts Conservatory was to become an advocate of the arts. As the founder of the Black Archives History and Research Foundation of South Florida and the historic Overtown Folklife Lyric Theater Complex, provided an opportunity for youth and students and adults of all ages, cultures and creeds and races to enjoy the arts and the glory days of Overtown. I don't know that I would have had that perspective if it had not been for the Fine Arts Conservatory.
I heard that there was a conservatory and they would admit black students. And then they said you could go in there and they'd teach you some of the fine steps in playing the clarinet because that's what I wanted to do. It's just a big difference to walk into a conservatory and you didn't have to sit in the back. I mean, you were just a person, you were a free individual. You know, you see all these great instructors there and people who wanted to be there and wanted to work with you and wanted to see you successful. We did classical music at that particular time. You know, even today, I hear pictures at an exhibition. I hear Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, Sibelius, Finlandia. And I hear all of these things and I can appreciate those because of some of the things I learned at the conservatory. It changed my life because when I became the principal of Drew Elementary, a school with art, music, drama, and dance, I kept thinking about the conservatory. And those people downtown in the administration building, they said how successful our program was, but they didn't have to tell me that. I knew because it was a magnet program, and people started auditioning to come to our school. It's a school in the inner city that drew people like Hillary Clinton. We had Governor Graham to come there. They came because they wanted to see the children, what they were doing, and they wanted to see how they were achieving. And I was so proud of that. And as we did it, I kept thinking about the conservatory.
Eventually, the Fine Arts Conservatory needed a home. It couldn't be this orphan school that would go from a funeral parlor to somebody's unrented office. It needed a space.
We bought the house on Northwest 60th Street. The neighbors were unhappy, but we couldn't have been more joyous. We had a big yard, a tiny house, and we made it into Carnegie Hall.
In between classes, that big tree became the playground for us. So we would sit under the tree and we would talk, we would eat our snacks.
There were a lot of chicken dinners there. They were raising money all the time. So there was a big yard and there was always that excitement of running around in the yard with kids. That was more of a party atmosphere.
I remember music coming from everywhere, dance and music and kids acting. Felt like there were no boundaries really between people and that everyone was brought there for this common love of the arts.
The Austin family were a particularly valuable asset to the conservatory. Charles Austin was a pioneer in saxophone, and he had played all over the world.
When I was at the Fine Arts Conservatory, I taught woodwinds, saxophones, jazz, flute, and classical flute. The beauty of the Fine Arts Conservatory was the integrating of talented people. I enrolled my daughter in this Greenfield School because it was first class, and I knew she was going to get it right.
I studied music, dance, and got a good dose of discipline at the Fine Arts Conservatory.
We had a ballet teacher who took us all in like little ducks in a row, and we were very, very serious.
I remember Renee Zentgraf, who was a very Russian kind of taskmaster, and telling me to squeeze my buns, and the stick that she drummed on the floor rhythmically, you know, lift this higher and drop that lower and shift this, and you know, but the discipline was just, you know, just unreal, just unbelievable. And then on to Susan Stadler, who's a little bit more lenient.
Miss Stadler was a tiny ballerina. And she brought ballet home to us in a way that we had not directly experienced before. I'd studied dance before, but my teachers were not ballerinas. They were predominantly people who'd studied modern and jazz. So Miss Stadler was my first exposure to a real ballerina who understood what placement and lines were in the old European sense.
Her class was one of the first that went to a public forum in Miami to show integration.
I initially took ballet. I also took tap dancing. But this was at a very early age. I can tell you by about the time I was 8 years old or so, that stopped. Primarily because I realized that I was not a good dancer. And it was a woman teacher. It was mostly girls. And after a while, what's a boy gonna do? Somewhere along in there, they got Alexander Nigodoff to come in. And that then gave a boy something to at least think about.
Alex Nigodoff came to us through, I believe, the Miami Conservatory, because we were looking for a very serious dance teacher. And he had all the trimmings of a Russian prima donna. And he gave a lot of class to that tiny room where he taught. We had some of the best teachers in the community who came forward and dedicated those Saturdays to these children, and we paid them.
I never forget their faces. When they arrived to my room and I told them, look, you're going to learn how to play the piano. And I noticed in their little faces that they can't believe me.
I had some great little voice students. I recall one little girl used to walk into my office and she'd be so hoarse because she would go to the football game the night before and she would scream for the Hurricanes to win. And she'd come into me being hoarse as could be. And I showed her how to get over the hoarseness and how to sing. She actually followed me and sent me a present every Christmas for about 20 years after that. It was a wonderful feeling.
The Fine Arts Conservatory was sort of a mecca, a place where people could go, and they didn't have to pay a lot.
The prices were $1 for a class.
The Fine Arts Conservatory never made money. It was a not-for-profit. It was hand-to-mouth. It was done by charity.
People who cared about the conservatory gave us pianos, instruments, actual money. The ones who really were devoted and who were well off helped us continue.
My sister went to Fine Arts Conservatory as well.
I studied ballet and I studied music and musical theater. I remember vividly Miss Greenfield because she taught me getting to know you, getting to know all about you, getting to like you, getting to hope you like me.
Lush and Sheila went there and they enjoyed it. They were there as little children. And the program there was really fit for young people.
We were so nurtured, we didn't know it at the time, and so protected and so supported. The entire day was just a whirlwind of activity. And we were just a bunch of little kids running around putting on a show. And it was so enriching for us, and we thought the entire world was like that because who knew that it wasn't? We didn't know that we were different, but we definitely knew that we were special because that's what we were taught.
Somehow we knew that music and dance was a privilege. It was an honor and a privilege to be a part of something like Fine Arts Conservatory. We could not have expressed it directly as little kids, but we knew, and we carried ourselves as if we knew.
Ms. Greenfield actually had us in a little tour company here in Miami-Dade County, if you can believe that.
The conservatory, I think, was to raise money, would have performances around town.
One of the recitals I remember was The Little Engine That Could. And it was the costuming for it and the preparations, learning the dance steps and learning the songs and learning about musicality and working together to make one big thing happen. At the end of it all, there was this huge sense of accomplishment and this feeling like, wow, I really did this.
We developed a love for the arts, a lifelong love of the arts.
You were dancing, you were speaking, you were singing, you were doing some sort of a solo. The experiences were so useful for one's everyday life and for the things I do right now.
We never forgot the lessons that we learned at the Fine Arts Conservatory. We knew about equality, but we also knew what it meant to be Black and to open doors for other people and provide opportunities for people who were less fortunate or who did not have those opportunities.
And it did provide a foundation for the rest of our lives in terms of confidence, in terms of an appreciation for the world, and finding your place in it.
The Fine Arts Conservatory changed my life in many, many ways. First of all, confidence, which is essential for a young African American growing up in segregation, in circumstances where you may not always be told that you're okay. But at Fine Arts Conservatory, you knew that. Every time you walked in the door, you were validated as a human being. You may go home and watch television and people were being sprayed with water, bitten by dogs, just for you to have basic civil rights. But when you walked in Fine Arts Conservatory, you got on your toes. You felt elevated. It was just self-expression that was outside of the pain. The Fine Arts Conservatory was that link for me early on. So when I had very serious challenges as a teenager, I could sing right through it. When I've had challenges as an adult, I can sing right through it. So we've got to find a director for this piece. What do you think?
Well, yes, I think somebody who perhaps dances and choreographs and directs.
We do new plays by new playwrights that have a new perspective. We nurture and promote talent. We nurture and promote new work. Service is the price we pay to be on this earth. We're all here to serve. Miss Greenfield served a community. And that is what New Professional Theater is all about. Even though we sit right here on 42nd Street, we are a community.
You know, I think there would have been that connotation that here was a do-gooder coming into the Black community and, you know, doing something that, you know, she felt obligated to do. But those of us who knew the real concept behind the Fine Arts Conservatory and the real person behind Ruth Greenfield and her late husband Arnold and the entire family gathering that we created knew it was not about that. It really was about imparting knowledge of the arts and making sure that we understood how arts factored into the overall value of education.
I would give her all the publicity she wanted in the newspaper and about the events because I wanted it to be a success. I know what cultural arts can do.
Garth Reeves was always supportive of the whole community. And I don't think there was a week that went by that we weren't part of their news report.
The Fine Arts Conservatory was showcasing the fact that blacks and whites, both at the parental level and the children's level, could work together, learn, and progress together. It was probably the most positive element at that time in this growing civil rights movement in Miami.
There was a whole group of white families, mainly people I knew, and it was natural for them to bus their children wherever we went.
I enrolled my children in the Fine Arts Conservatory because I knew a few people who were involved with it, and these were the people who have the same values that I did.
Both my parents were very active in the civil rights movement, and it felt so right for them to have us participate in something like this. The conservatory was this island of integration that I was not familiar with at all. It was so different from my experience. It felt extremely comfortable in the way things should be. And it felt like a real refuge for me.
I enrolled my own kids. It was natural. It was a Saturday, they went with me. And there were 4 of them.
I studied piano for obvious reasons. I had been playing the piano since I was about 5.
He was a very good pianist, still is, and he loved it. Clarinet was my instrument.
Tim played clarinet, never well.
I wasn't musical. I was much more interested in visual things. I was more interested in painting. If they had had filmmaking at the time, I would have been in heaven.
There were outside activities where we'd visit, I think we would go to a museum. So that wasn't just music and art and dance, it was sort of a whole gestalt.
The influence of the Fine Arts Conservatory on my life is profound because I became aware of black and white. I became aware of integration. I became aware of poverty. You know, years later, I made films for HBO on African Americans. I made a film called The Blacklist, which was a play on the negativity of the word the blacklist. A film about achievement by African Americans. So would I have done something like that had it not been for my mother? Of Of course not. I think my mother's influence is tremendous in my life.
One day, there was a mailman named Paul Popelka who came in to deliver the letters and at the same time was playing the recorder. And when I heard him, and he was such a pro, I asked him if he would teach at the conservatory, and he said yes. And he stayed with us for years. He taught very gifted young people like Jane Kramer.
He used to wear his mailman uniform, but I just remember him being really kind and really gentle and really open. I really took to the recorder. It really became part of my body and still is. It was important for children like me, and I don't know how many other children, maybe hardly any, from Miami Beach actually got to experience the benefits of being in an integrated school of the arts at that time, and the formative effect of that, given the alternative, which is what most of us were living in. My experience at the Fine Arts Conservatory was the most pivotal experience of my life, and it led to my passion for wanting to recreate something like that. And so in 2008, I had the opportunity to do so. I took time from my career and started enriching lives through music, initially by myself, and now it's a full music school for kids in San Rafael, California's Canal neighborhood. I'm working with a population of families who are immigrant. They feel they're outsiders. Many of the parents don't speak English. They're disconnected from their children. Music brings them together. Music brings families to come to a safe place, to see their children perform and feel proud of them. And as families come together, it has impact, rolling impact on the rest of their lives. The parents are much more comfortable going to the school settings, advocating for their children, which they wouldn't have been comfortable before. I have a 25-year-old daughter who is now in social work school, and she's interested in some of these very same issues of social justice and equity, and I feel really proud of her values and her own way of participating in cultural life in a meaningful way.
We had integrated concerts at our house on Palm Island, and sometimes the buses from the black schools would drive up. And the only way that some of the neighbors could really get us to court was to say that we were charging. And we were charging about $1.50 for a concert. And so we went to court with the judge, and he looked at these people who were against us, and he said, look, you have all kinds of charities. You've got B'nai B'rith, you've got Red Cross, you've got all, and you charge. So case dismissed.
Any attempt in the 1950s to bring white students and black students into the same classroom setting for educational purposes, for any subject, much less music, would have been resisted heavily by the broader white community.
They now saw real threats to the end of this two-society South that they had. So they're even tougher about enforcing segregation. So Ruth was looked upon as a subversive, as a communist, as a troublemaker.
My parents paid dearly for it. My father's career was ruined to a great extent. My father had a law degree from Harvard and was really unable to get a job. Had to open his own firm and try and find clients. None of the big firms in Miami would take him because of the politics of my parents. We moved from this very privileged house on Miami Beach to the ghetto, essentially, to a home that was still in the family that had been abandoned for years. My mother even went against her own family. I think they were very afraid for what she was doing. They were afraid for her. They didn't understand it. Why go against the establishment?
I was blacklisted from every music organization in the city. Even the one where I had become an elected member at the University of Michigan. The local chapter didn't want me around.
The Association of Musicians tried to make me be part of them, and I say, I'm sorry, I can't belong to a place where Ruth Greenfield is not there.
It began to shake members of her social group, and she was ostracized by people as a result of her activities towards integration.
You know, it was always surprising to me that some of my friends didn't like it. They thought I'd gone too far, and yet we stayed friendly, and they even sent their children to the conservatory eventually. I was called a communist because we were very liberal, and I think that the conservatory was hurt a lot during the McCarthy period by these people considering us the wrong kind of Americans.
There was some reaction, and that reaction was really the parents of the children that I was going to school with. And there were a certain group of them that were unhappy with the fact that my mother had this background, and they didn't want me to attend the school.
The children were going to Cushman School, where I had gone as a child, and when some of the parents came to Miss Cushman, the principal, and said, we're going to take our children out of this school unless you get rid of those commies. And Miss Cushman stood up, smiled, and said, I'll be sorry to see you leave.
You did have allies, but sometimes you felt alone.
George Wallace was right. George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, who stood in the schoolhouse door and said, we can't have integration because if you let white kids and black kids go to school together, they're going to start dating each other and marrying each other. And you can't have that, now you have a miscegenated nation. And that's what's happened.
Downtown Miami really became, by the 1970s, just a destination for work. And it declined in large measure because of the growth of suburbia.
Most of the buildings in the whole downtown area were dilapidated. And it was a scary situation. After 5 o'clock, you couldn't find a soul in downtown Miami.
People worked there, but they didn't want to stay around. There were no restaurants. There was nothing of social impact.
When we came downtown, everybody thought the institution had gone crazy because everybody had gone the other way and we were coming in. But the college felt a significant sense of responsibility in helping revitalize downtown. And we always felt that the arts could play a very important role in that. And that's how Ruth Greenfield came into the picture. It started with me as a member of the humanities faculty. Immediately we saw the tremendous talent and history that she brought with her. So we talked to her about what could we do to begin to bring attention to the arts in downtown Miami and use that as a tool to make people feel comfortable in downtown. And Ruth came up with the idea of the Lunchtime Lively Arts Series.
After seeing the lunch shows at Trafalgar Square in London, it made sense to start something here.
The Lunchtime Lively Arts Series came to Miami the way the conservatory came to Miami. It was something that was off-kilter, something against the grain.
The series, which we had every Wednesday at noon, free, was sponsored completely by the college, except that I would go out to the bankers and to the different enterprises here downtown and encourage them to give because it was bringing more people.
The Lunchtime Lively Arts Series was multi-layered. So it could be, one day it could be a dance performance. Another time it could be somebody who's a good public speaker giving some sort of a speech rendition of something. Another time it could be a musical instrument. Another time it could be somebody singing. So it was a multi-varied thing, which was great because the audience never knew what to expect, and the audience knew they weren't going to get the same thing week after week after week.
We started out with a parade on Flagler Street, and I think that that's what worked us up into the excitement of getting crowds.
Can you imagine people walking down Flagler Street, hearing music in the air?
In the very beginning, when we didn't have the college, we used the street a lot. We even had the Philharmonic Orchestra on the steps of the courthouse. Our second concert was presented by a young man who was a pianist by the name of Suarez, and he came in the middle of the day to the concert in a tuxedo, I think it was purple, and he started to play, and it rained. And we had a lot of children there, and they sang, of course, Rain, Rain, Go Away, and he stopped, and he continued. And to think that people would love to come and listen to Liszt and Chopin.
Being on the steps of the courthouse was unique. It was wonderful. I mean, who would dream of such a wonderful thing, for 1 hour to listen to classical music in the open air?
It brought people from all walks of life together. It was blue collar, white collar, young and old, that came together for the lively arts.
And it was a big cultural phenomenon to have the fine arts and to have all of that downtown that we had not had before.
In fact, our whole audience, if I may say so, followed us wherever we went, whether it was outside or in Gusman Hall or inside the college.
People could bring their lunch, or we would sell brown bag lunches already packed.
It was great, and people had it regularly on their calendar where you could take a brown bag lunch into the Gusman Theater, sit down and be entertained by Stephen Grappelli, Ira Sullivan.
I discovered that there were national acts and stars who were coming down to Miami and wouldn't be bothered by coming to something in the middle of the day. And we always paid our people.
One of the things I enjoyed was doing the press releases every single week and being in touch with the journalists at the Herald.
There was a new man at the Miami Herald. His name was James Roos. James Roos had come from a very big job in Chicago, and he took us very seriously. And every week we were in the paper.
The concerts during that time served a cultural and social as well as a civil rights purpose, and were very instrumental in the development of this town.
To see now this amalgamation of races and cultures and arts coming together was really a real blessing.
Ruth grew up from the time she was a little girl until she was an adult as a downtown person. Her grandparents lived in the center city. Spring Gardens, one of the first suburbs just outside of downtown Miami. She was down there. Her dad was a downtown merchant. And she couldn't abide the fact that downtown, the heart of what was now a sprawling community, was dying that way. And she thought, hey, I can help reverse this. And she had this great gift of music, the great gift to organize people, a passion for doing positive things. She put all those together, and she created this Lunchtime Lively Arts series.
The Lunchtime Lively Arts brought a diversity of artistic and cultural experiences for people. So you heard the mainstream kinds of art, but you also heard new and emerging kinds of art. You explored avant-garde in dance and theater and in music.
For example, today, one of the preeminent innovative composers in this world is Philip Glass, and guess what? He was at the Lively Arts.
I recall specifically a day walking down Flagler Street and hearing the sound of Philip Glass playing in the Gusman. The doors were open and I walked in, and he was rehearsing for a performance he was going to give later that day for the Lunchtime Lively Arts series. I stayed for the rehearsal, and then I went back for the performance, and I counted as one of the high points of my artistic life in downtown.
We had many fine local artists here. I mean, really first rate.
The program began to attract a lot of people to it, and we had the opportunity to give emerging artists in Miami the opportunity to perform.
The response you get is what encourages you. And when a reviewer like James Roos takes notice of you when you're young and actually starts charting your career when you're that young, I can't tell you what that does for you.
Marvis has the voice of an angel. It is the sweetest sound.
Marvis was an incredible soprano in the 10th grade. We were not at all surprised when Marvis came to Manhattan and ended up at the Metropolitan Opera. She sang this song, Mary had a baby. Oof. Non
What I remember about the Lunchtime Lively Arts series was being very excited that we were going to get to sing at Gusman Hall.
It was just unbelievable. The acoustics were great. You could hear a pin drop there. It was just, the sound was awesome. We probably didn't even need amplification to play there. It was that special.
There's a lady born in December. The way she guides me, I will remember.
I was fortunate enough to be able to bring a busload of indigent, frail, elderly people who had no opportunity to be part of any cultural events going on in the community.
The director of the Bass Art Museum at that time, Diane Camber, wrote us a beautiful letter. Of all the programs around, surely the Downtown Lively Arts is one of the most significant. It enriches the lives of so many people with limited incomes who have few cultural options due to lack of funds.
Sister of mine.
The day before their wedding, they walked in silence in Central Park. Searching his eyes at parting, she said, "I hope we aren't making a serious mistake. It isn't hard to."
There came to us an opportunity to listen to people who were poets and writers. And we put in for a grant and received $100,000 to put on the Lively Word. And we had big discussions afterwards. It was really quite enjoyable.
We had the greatest writers that anybody ever heard of.
Warbling all day to herself the thousand variations of one song.
Being alive is when each moment's a new start.
That was one of the things about Lunchtime Lively Arts. It was about reading, poets, writers, anybody who was engaged in the arts, and it was just a wonderful experience.
There were over 400 of these presentations in about a 15-year period. And it went on all the way in from 1972 to the late 1980s.
As one man said, who was in our audience regularly, this is what it's all about.
It's my belief that we should be in our daily lives confronted by moments of unsettling beauty.
The Lunchtime Lively Arts was the precursor of everything important that has happened in the arts in Miami. The book fair, the Miami Book Fair International, the film festival, the art gallery system, everything had a real beginning as a result of the significant impact that the Lunchtime Lively Arts had.
The Lunchtime Lively Art series began the renaissance in downtown of art. Cultural del Lobo is a direct result of the Lunchtime Lively Art series. You could probably put up an argument that the Art Center is a result of the Lunchtime Lively Art series. I know that the Art Center is certainly a reflection of the commitment to the arts by a group of people back in the 80s that resulted in what we have downtown today.
It taught us a lesson in terms of what the arts can do in terms of bringing a community together.
My mother went from being scorned in the 1950s as this person who was forcing integration and music on everyone to someone who was adored and who was revered in a way because she was bringing music to everyone in Miami.
She wanted to create a little piece of Paris in Miami, and she was able to do it.
It's not fair to say of Miami that we did a lot more than others did, but I think that we helped with the splendor of sound.
This is